Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
Is nature nonpartisan? Earlier this year, we had an interview with Dr. Caleb Scoville from Tufts University, who received an Andrew Carnegie Fellowship to explore whether environmental issues are highly partisan. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. It seems that here in America, just about everything is partisan these days. But is nature partisan? As another of our guests pointed out, those who enjoy going out into nature come in all political flavors. That said, our guest today is Benji Backer, the driver behind the Nature is Nonpartisan campaign to get the American public, all of us, to convince the decision makers in Washington that the environment is too important of an issue to be partisan. I'll be back in a minute with Benji to let him explain the need for such a campaign.
Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It's also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. Washington's National Park Fund is the official philanthropic partner serving Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. WNPF raises funds for scientific research, youth experiences, volunteer programs, and projects that preserve and protect these national parks in Washington state. Learn how you can help at WNPF.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Support from readers and listeners like you make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Welcome to the Traveler, Benji.
It is great to be here. I'm a traveler and I love national parks. This is perfect.
You can't go wrong with that, can you?
No, actually, you literally can't. It's the best part of life.
So what's your favorite national park?
I would say probably Olympic, just because of the diversity. And I went to college in Washington, so I'm a little bit biased, but just the ability to go to the ocean, to see the amazing rock formations, to see the rainforest, and to go into the backcountry in a way that's pretty untouched. It's pretty hard to get back there. There's no roads, which is why it's so untouched, and through the mountains at least. And it's just amazing. And then you get the tidal pools, and I mean, it's just such a diverse, amazing place. But I love so many national parks that it is hard to pick a favorite, but I think just because of the diversity and the closeness to home, I love it.
Yeah, it's really 3 parks in one. It is just an amazing place, and if I didn't live in Utah, I'd probably visit more often. But
you got a lot around you. You don't need to go too far to get the beauty.
You really don't. Within a day's drive, I think there's 8 or 9 national parks. Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Grand Teton, on and on and on.
Yeah, you got and then all the Utah ones. But yeah, it's great to discuss one of my favorite things in the entire world, and the reason why I care, and the reason why so many people care about the environment. So excited to get into it.
Well, yeah, it's been a topical question recently and long term. I mean, you can go back to Teddy Roosevelt or even before him about the human connection to nature. And so, I'm curious, what is the genesis of your campaign, Nature is Nonpartisan? Why did you launch this?
Yeah, I mean, I've come at this from growing up in Wisconsin to a family that was very split politically. My parents are moderately right of center. Vegan Wisconsinites doesn't make a lot of sense, right? There's a
Seems
lot
contradictory.
there. Yeah, it's very contradictory, but I also have some, liberal family members who are big hunters and fishermen, and it's just I grew up at a young age knowing that the boxes that we put ourselves in politically aren't necessarily true, and that if we're going to get good solutions on the environment, we need to have both sides at the table. And the best solutions for the environment throughout American history came when both sides worked together. I mean, you can argue about the efficacy of these policies in today's terms, but like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the EPA, all these things were supported in the Senate with votes that looked like 95-5, and nearly 100% of senators, voted together to protect our air, our water, and our environment. And we've lost those days in our country. And part of the reason that Nature's Nonpartisan exists is to reinstill the cultural side of this. We need America's heritage on the environment to come back. We need our conservation heritage to come back, but it won't come back if we only have half the aisle standing up. But it also won't happen if we just focus on conservatives either. And we need to just make this a shared identity. We need to focus on outcomes instead of ideology. And right now on the environment, we're focused more on ideology than outcomes. And so, my goal is to build a cultural movement with Nature's Nonpartisan that will be the future of the environmental movement and really use a grassroots push to show politicians that when they do the right thing on the environment, they'll be rewarded by both sides, but by America as a whole. And there's really no organization that's been able to do that in the last few decades. And we're hoping to take that and run with it and show Americans that the environment can be nonpartisan again. It should be nonpartisan again, and that again we care about outcomes, not ideology.
Yeah, yeah. And on your website, part of the mission statement says you're working towards a healthier environment. How do you define a healthy environment? I mean, some people would say, we've got a pretty healthy environment right now. Some would say it's at risk right now.
I would say that we've made some really great progress in America towards cleaner air and cleaner water, but I would say we're slipping in the wrong direction again. You look at our national park maintenance backlog, you look at the water quality in the Midwest, you look at the forest fires that are ravaging, our country every summer, you look at the flooding and the coastal resilience issues that we're facing. These are problems that have gotten worse, not better. And although we've made progress compared to maybe 100 years ago, in many ways, we're slipping back towards that, in my opinion. And so a healthy environment to me means something that, we are that it's a healthy environment equals a healthy people. And we need to be able to understand that those two things are combined. We need healthier food, we need healthier water, we need healthier soil, we need healthier forests and habitats. And as you and I both know, a lot of that is at risk, and it has been at risk increasingly for the last few decades. I would argue that since the early 2000s, we've really made almost zero progress on finding sensible solutions for our environment, our physical environment. We've made some progress and gone back and forth on energy and on carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and everything. But from the actual physical environment perspective, we have not really made any massive investments outside of the Great American Outdoors Act into national parks, which really didn't help with the problem today because we still have a $23 billion backlog in maintenance projects. So we really haven't made a big investment since the 20th century, and that's showing. Our environment is not as healthy as it can and should be, and we have a duty as humanity to protect it and conserve it because it impacts us every single day.
Earlier this year, I had a podcast interview with Dr. Caleb Scoville. He's a professor at Tufts University who received an Andrew Carnegie Fellowship to explore whether environmentalism and environmental issues are highly partisan, and if so, why. And part of what caught Carnegie's attention from his pitch was trying to understand the polarization and the political division in America and how to address that problem. As you mentioned, it seems like we see two different viewpoints in Congress, and they're marching in lockstep away from each other. But as Scoville put it during our interview, His pitch was to understand not simply if and how, and in what ways and how we became divided over environmental issues, but also how our relationship as Americans and as partisans to environmental issues is connected to other issues and identities. So, how environmental divisions are woven into a broader kind of partisan fabric that increasingly defines people in terms of us and them. I mean, that certainly sounds like the world we're living in today, no?
It absolutely does. And we've just come to it's a really great point. We've come to this belief as a populace that because you're my enemy on this issue, that you're my enemy on every issue. And that's never been true throughout history. I mean, even before we got on here, we were saying that there's a specific NGO we were talking about, makes good points and bad points. We've kind of forgotten what calling balls and strikes is and working with each other when the Venn diagram overlaps. And yeah, I mean, everything's become hyper partisan. For a while, there were certain issues that didn't get as engulfed in those culture wars as others did. I mean, you look at education, you look at healthcare, you look at the environment. Those are kind of things that do impact pretty much everyone in a very similar way. And so for a while, it didn't, it wasn't part of the partisan culture wars that we see today. And but yet still, guns and abortion and those sorts of things were always pretty polarizing. Well, now the response to the environment is very similar to that of guns and abortion. I mean, it's really unfortunate that we've gotten to a place where the perception of the environment is that it's such a polarizing topic, when in people's hearts and minds they don't want it to be that way. They want to be able to work across ideologies to get things done. And it's not just this kumbaya thing. It's just like that's where you get the more durable solutions, when you don't have to go back and forth, when you don't have to wait for one side to get into the office or the other side to get into office. And also in a democracy, when you have both sides working on the solution where there is an overlap in the Venn diagram, it ends up benefiting that entire bulk of the population rather than just a half of the population, because their voice is at the table. And right now, it's like half the country is at the table trying to win as much as they can, as fast as they can in the environment, and go as far as they can on the left, and then on the right they're just trying to undo it all and basically cause chaos to fight back against the left doing all of that. And it's so unhealthy. And it's a really good example of how, I mean, COVID became partisan. Everything becomes partisan now, and it's largely due to social media, the incentives in the news, and because our society has determined that we are so tribal that if you're not on our side 100% of the time, you're against us 100% of the time, and it's just really unhealthy, especially on an issue like this.
And the irony of it is that people of all political persuasions, whether you're far right or you're far left, love the outdoors. You've got your hunters, your skiers, your bikers, your kayakers, your snowmobilers, your downhill skiers, your cross country skiers. They're all political persuasions, and they all find a connection in the environment. And so you have to wonder why they get pulled apart so much when we're talking about the environment.
Well, I think it's largely due to social identity, which we can get into. But I was making a joke at a speech this week. We basically live in a instead of a two-party system on the environment, Republicans and Democrats. We should talk about it in terms of REI versus Cabela's. It's the two types of environmentalists out there and conservationists. But what they don't realize is the Cabela's shoppers, which tend to be right leaning, probably more Trump leaning, and the REI shoppers, which probably in 2024 more Harris leaning. They all want the same things. They all want to protect. They might not want the same things on abortion or immigration or guns, but they do want the same thing on the environment. And we've kind of lost that because the assumption again is, oh, because I don't agree with my liberal friend Jennifer on immigration, then I must not agree with her on the environment whatsoever, and they must have some alternative agenda that is going to come from my livelihood on the environment as well. And what we're trying to tell Americans is that we don't need it to be that way. And again, throughout history, it wasn't always this way. Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush. There was a few decades there where, and again, I'm not saying I agree with everything all those presidents did on the environment, but where they figured it out to pass and implement very bipartisan environmental policies. And it's because they realize that if you're a rural hunter from Missouri who lives off the land and has a 5-acre farm, you also want to protect the environment just as much as the Seattleite who spends their weekends in the Cascade Mountains hiking and skiing. So it's unfortunate that we lost that reality, but it's just a symptom of a broader political problem that exists, and we've got to get to the root of that if we're gonna solve this challenge that we have of a worsening environmental health crisis, which we've already touched on a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think a little bit, or a lot of it, as you mentioned earlier, is social media and the 24-hour news cycle, and how partisan media has become. It's kind of frightening. But
Well, that's what the incentives are. I mean, the incentive is when Biden announces an environmental policy for Fox News to go and say, this is a socialist policy that is coming for your livelihood. But I will say it's also the incentive for CNN and MSNBC when Trump does something to say, this is just going to ruin everyone's environmental quality in their life. And it may or may not be true in each individual instance. But overall, that's the incentive. The incentive is to tell us that the other side hates you. And that's unfortunately extended to the environment. But then on top of that, a Donald Trump or a AOC or whatever person on the left can see that, and then they go even further into their corner on the issue because they know that will get more attention. They know that will get more clicks. They know that will get more views. And again, we've got to get out of that, because behind that noise is an underbelly of America that wants to protect the environment in a sensible way across partisan boundaries, behind the noise. And it's overwhelming, but it's just quiet right now.
Dr. Scoville, during our conversation, pointed to the Reagan administration. I know you mentioned President Reagan succeeded in some bipartisan environmental legislation, but Dr. Scoville pointed out that it was during the Reagan administration that the Republican Party really adopted a strong deregulatory approach to a whole host of issues, economic and otherwise, and including the environment. And that's where the portrayal of the Endangered Species Act as evil, and it was taking your rights away, your ability to farm as you wanted to, or build where you wanted to. We're seeing a lot of that today with the climate change issue, right? On one side, it's evil, climate change, and what we're being forced to do in the name of, saving the globe from, overheating. They shouldn't be able to do that to us.
Right. I mean, I think also we're in this society where it's all or nothing all the time, where both one side's 100% regulation all the time, and the other side's 100% deregulation all the time. And the reality is sometimes you do need private landowners to have incentive to do good things in their property rather than telling them what to do. But on the flip side, it's also sometimes that you need to have good barriers in place to make sure that we don't just run our environment into the ground. And there's a balance that has to be struck. And I don't think either side has figured that out yet, because they're so busy trying to undo when they see that they think Biden's overreaching on regulations, then they do a complete dereg agenda, and instead of finding some sort of alignment in the middle between the two. And that's where the solution lies. I mean, I think the Endangered Species Act has been a failure in a lot of ways in terms of telling farmers and telling landowners how to live their lives. And then they just don't tell the government when there is an endangered species on their property because they don't want their land to be taken over. But the solution to that is not to just undo the Endangered Species Act. It would be to improve it and to make it better and to make it more of a, public-private partnership, work with landowners, but incentivize them to do the right thing rather than punish them, but also rather than undo the entire thing whatsoever. I mean, it's really backwards how back and forth it is and how all or nothing it is. And I mean, that's true with energy, right? You're seeing that happen on energy. It's like we're only solar and wind, and we can't even conceptualize the fact that nuclear or natural gas or other like reliable 24-hour sources can be a part of the equation, or it's only oil and gas and coal. And the reality is the solution is probably in the middle between those two things. And so again, it's this all or nothing dereg versus regulation, solar and wind versus oil and gas and coal. And when we're doing that, everyone loses because we actually don't make any progress. We're just basically getting zero progress because we go 5 steps there and then we take the 5 steps back. And I do think that we need to be able to call balls and strikes more often. Politicians need to feel like they are held accountable. Just because you think the Indigenous Species Act is ineffective doesn't mean you can just undo it. And just because you think the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act are outdated doesn't mean you can just undo it. It means we should improve it. And to do that, you should work across ideological boundaries to make sure that it's a long-lasting, durable policy and that all rational voices are at the table. Otherwise, we're not really living in the democratic republic that was designed by our founding fathers and by the people who have made us into who we are today. And I think we're challenging what is possible with our democratic republic in the 21st century because I don't think it's working right now.
Yeah. You make some good points and some fairly ambitious goals. We're going to get more into them. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. We're talking today with Benji Backer. He is the promoter behind Nature is Nonpartisan, a nationwide campaign to try and get the American people to have more influence on the environment. We'll be back in a minute. Hi, Kurt Repenchek with National Parks Traveler. Today I've asked Kim O'Connell, one of our contributing editors, to join me. We are celebrating 20 years of National Parks Traveler, being online to bring all the news of what's going on in the national parks and the National Park Service with you. Kim, it's been, I know you haven't been here the whole 20 years, but you've been with us for a long time. It's been a lot of fun, hasn't it?
It has been. I can't believe that 20 years have gone by already. I think I've been associated with the Traveler for a good 10 of those years, if not a little bit more than that. And it's been 10 really interesting years. We've seen a lot of park issues come across the transom, and we've covered a lot of things. But it's always great to cover the national parks.
You know, that first week back in August of 2005, I think I had 400 readers on this old early version of blogging platform called TypePad. And you zoom forward to 2025 and, 2 to 3 million readers and listeners a year come to the Traveler. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we've grown such an audience?
Well, congratulations on that. But I can tell you that one of the things I really love about the Traveler is that it keeps adapting to the times in terms of readership and what the readers want. You're on social media, you do videos, you do podcasts, in addition to all that good old-fashioned reporting. But I think that has something to do with the growth of the Traveler. But another aspect of that is just the day-to-day journalism has not changed. The Traveler has always provided that really high-level quality journalism that is the meat of what any publication needs to retain readership. And so you have that bedrock foundational journalism on top of all kinds of new media and, options for readers and listeners that, keep up with the times.
We try. We always try to keep pushing the bar forward and higher. And it's never been so hard as it is today to get news from the National Park Service because of the political climate. Unfortunately, the people in the Park Service are very hesitant, if not afraid, to talk to reporters. And that makes our job really that much harder.
It really does. It's a tough time for journalism because there's, I think, a lot of fear and trepidation among the ranks of the Park Service to say the wrong thing. There's been a lot of cuts to the Park Service and everyone wants to protect their jobs. And so it makes our job of reporting on the national parks that much harder when it's difficult for us to get the real story.
Yeah, it really does. And there was so much more attention focused on the national parks from media around the country than there was obviously 20 years ago for sure, and maybe even 5 years ago. And I think competition is good. It makes us think harder. It makes us think for bigger picture stories. And rather than, certainly we're going to cover the wildfires and the hurricanes and the national parks and the impacts to those and lodging news and whatnot. But I think one thing that we try to accomplish at the Traveler is we really strive to go beyond the front page news because there are so many interesting and fascinating stories that don't make the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post. There's science stories, there's cultural stories, there's historic stories, historical Stories are always surfacing across the national park system, and they deserve some attention to be brought out into public view.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as old-time journalists, Kurt, we really appreciate the coverage that a big newspaper like the Washington Post and the New York Times can do about the national parks. But what we can do that's different is that we get into the nitty-gritty. And because we have such a long and deep understanding of the park system, we can get those stories and understand the players and understand all the circumstances in a way that I think, you know, a reporter at the New York Times can't necessarily get because they haven't been covering it so deeply.
No, that's true. Not too many years ago, one of the New York Times reporters reached out to me for some background on a story involving Virgin Islands National Park in the Caribbean. As I mentioned at the top, Kim, 20th anniversary for the National Park Traveler. To make it a grand celebration, we're asking readers and listeners to help us raise $20,000 by Labor Day. We're almost halfway there. We could really use your support because it means so much in terms of the content that we can bring to you to inform you about how your national parks are being managed and how you can enjoy them. So to donate, please donate today. You can go to our website, nationalparkstraveler.org, and there's a donate button at the top right-hand corner of the page. So Benji, before the break, you were making some good points about, you know, the ESA is not the best. It could be better, but it's not the worst. We can go the same way with the Clean Air and Clean Water Act. How do you reach those solutions with the partisanship that's going on in Congress?
I think it's expecting that there is a better path forward. I mean, I just convened 30 CEOs of different conservation groups, from the most hunting and fishing kind of advocate groups to the traditional environmentalist NGOs. And the first question I got was, you know, why are you even trying this? And how did you get this to happen? We got 30 CEOs to show up, all in about a month's time, to discuss a roadmap on conservation. How did you get that to happen? Because this hasn't happened in years. And my answer was, because I tried. Like, I think we need to expect as Americans better from our politicians and from our leaders, that we don't want them to sit in their silos. And so if you're trying to craft a better policy, the default is just like, okay, we're going to work within our own echo chamber. We're going to just talk to the people that we usually talk to. We're going to talk to the think tanks or the policy organizations on our side. And we're going to go as hard and fast on our ideas as possible. But if you actually care about your ideas, you'd realize that's the worst plan possible, because you are just setting yourself up for failure some years down the line when you're not in charge anymore, because you're just going to have it undone. And there's a really great quote from Adam Kramer, my friend at the Outdoor Alliance, who said this on stage the other day with me. He said, perfection is when everyone's priorities, a perfect solution is when everyone's priorities are part of the solution. And when everyone's sitting at the table making it, because that's the thing that's going to last the longest. That's the thing that's going to be the most impactful. And so I think you need leaders to buck the curve, to say, you know what, I'm going to stop the trend of just working within my silo. And I'm going to sit down. Like, if you're on the right and you're trying to redo the Endangered Species Act, you don't just only talk to farmers and ranchers. You also talk to the environmental NGOs. You also talk to the tribes. You also talk to the water groups, and you figure out what's the biggest Venn diagram solution that I can come up with for these groups. And if you're on the left, you don't just talk to your environmentalist groups and kind of your preservationists. Talk to the hunters, talk to the anglers, talk to the farmers, talk to the ranchers, have them sit down, because everyone wins, and maybe not everyone gets as much as they wanted, but I'd rather go 80% in the right direction and miss out on that last 20%, then go 100% in and then have 100% of it taken away. And that's where we're at right now, is we're going all in and then we're going all out. And everyone is unwilling to have these unlikely stakeholders at the table because they're fearful of compromise, when in reality, going 80% of the way there and forgetting about the 20% that we disagree on is actually the fastest way to get the progress that you want. And you might not get every single thing that you want, but this is not a kid. You're not a kid. Politics shouldn't be a kid in the candy store trying to, take everything off the shelf that you possibly can. You should just take as much as you can feasibly get done and feel good about it. And there's really no ability to do that in politics right now. So I think that that's how you stop the trend. And our organization is trying to force that on politicians. We're working within the Trump administration and the Republican Congress. And in the same way that we would do if the Democrats ran the Congress and the presidency right now, we are saying to the Trump administration and Congress, we are going to come to you with your own voters, and we're also going to come to you with people who didn't vote for you. And we're going to try to come up with the best solutions that we demand together. And so far, that's worked. And I hope in 3 years, we look back and say, we got the most done across ideological boundaries that we could have gotten done. I don't know what that looks like yet, but that's the vision that we have. And I think that there's a real chance to do it. But it takes that level of thinking to say, I'm not going to go down the path that everyone else has been going down. It's easier that way. It's easier to just sit in your own silos, but it's not helpful.
You know, you mentioned the Trump administration, and earlier this year you met with some members of his administration, and the Washington Post story that I read about your meeting made it sound quite fruitful, that you really convinced them that, you know, the environment's important and let's take care of it. And yet the Trump administration is slashing funding and staffing for the National Park Service, for the Forest Service, for the land management agencies overall. They're working to weaken the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act. Just got word the other day that the administration has rendered inactive a Bureau of Land Management policy directive to prioritize environmental monitoring and analysis of livestock grazing on public lands and sensitive habitats. Are you still confident that you've made progress with the Trump administration?
Well, here, this is the reality. There are going to be a lot of steps back that are taken by this administration on the environment, and our job is to make as many steps forward as we can as well. And every day is a new day when it comes to working with people that you agree and disagree with. Just because someone took a step that we disagreed with yesterday doesn't mean that we can't try to get them to take a step in the right direction today. I can't fix what happened 2 months ago, nor can I fix what happened yesterday. I can only shepherd any person, any leader, to be the best leader they can be in the day that I'm in. And so there's 3.5 years left of this administration. I would rather assess if it's possible to move them in the right direction on conservation once we've already fully exhausted every effort we can have. We got them to step in and help stop the public land sell-off. Does that overshadow other cuts that have been made? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there are positive steps and there are negative steps. And that's why I think it's important to call balls and strikes. And I also think, do I love the gutting of the EPA? Do I love the gutting of the National Park Service? Do I love these cuts that have been made? No, I don't. But then that provides an opportunity. Okay, that happened, right? Whether I like it or not, that happened. And instead of shutting down and saying, I'm going to give up for the next 3.5 years, I can say, okay, well, if they gutted it, we all know it's necessary. We all know we need the National Park Service. We all know we need to have forests. And how do we help them rebuild a more effective version of the EPA and an effective version of the National Park Service, instead of just sitting on the sidelines and letting them just have made the cut without building anything back? And if they don't build anything back, then we say that was a loss. But at least we're trying to sit at the table and try. And I think that's the most that you can do with any administration, no matter how much you dislike or like them. And the reality is, too, there are going to be, again, if you're going to take 10 steps backwards, I'd rather take 5 steps forwards as well. And just because you took a loss doesn't mean you can't get a win. And I would rather focus on trying to get wins than just focus on how bad the losses have been. So and I don't think that means we're overshadowing it or we're poo-pooing it or we're, saying that they can get away with it or whatever. That's the critique that we get. I'm not saying that. I'm focused on trying to get wins. There are groups that are focused on trying to push back against losses. That's fine. I get that. But somebody's got to be trying to sit down with people and try to get wins. And in a perfect world, you could say, wow, the first 6 months were not good for conservation, but the last 3.5 years were. That's the sort of approach that we're taking, is that yesterday should not impact today, even if we didn't like what happened yesterday.
Yeah. I'd be curious to learn about some of your meetings with members of Congress. On your website, you point out that 95% of voters believe that protecting the nation's lakes, streams, and rivers is important. 88% prioritize sustainable agriculture to ensure healthy food is available. 93% believe clean energy is crucial. 82% support the idea of increased federal investment to proactively reduce the threat and intensity of future wildfires. Those polling results reflect many other polls that have been out there in recent years. I mean, earlier this year, the 15th annual Conservation in the West poll was conducted by Colorado College. It found that Westerners want elected officials to prioritize conservation over development of public lands. That poll showed that nearly 3/4 of those who live in Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, including those self-identified MAGA voters, don't want national monuments to be reduced in size or open to energy development. And yet, Congress doesn't seem to be listening. So how do you get Congress to listen?
The Congress isn't listening because the voters aren't speaking out. And it's only a specific type of voter that's speaking out. It's the traditional environmental activist that's speaking out, which is largely left-leaning voters who are fairly partisan. Whether on one side of the aisle, right? Like it leans one way. And I think what you can look at is the Mike Lee public land sell-off, and what worked there was the fact that only 10% of Americans support selling off public land, millions of acres of public land for development, 10%. And yet it was being proposed, right? Congress wasn't listening, whatever. Well, then the other 90% started speaking out really loudly. And it wasn't just the left, it was the left and the right. And that's what killed it. That bipartisan pushback, that cross-partisan, nonpartisan pushback is what killed it. So can we do that again? Can we do that again over and over and over again like we used to, so that politicians know that that's an expectation in Americans' minds? It's not just an expectation in liberals' minds. That's what we have to change. And I agree, Congress is not listening. Congress is not prioritizing these issues. They're not prioritizing public land. They're not prioritizing wildlife. They're not prioritizing resiliency. They're not prioritizing water quality. They're not prioritizing any of the environmental issues that Americans want action on. However, that can change because we know the data is there, but the data can only speak so much. We need voices. And, we can't all just sit on the sidelines when American politicians are going to do the wrong thing because they aren't hearing from us. They think that the 10% that wanted to sell off the public lands, which is, again, a 90-10 issue is very rare in American politics today. That 10% is the most partisan kind of policy, think tank group in DC. And so if that's all they hear from, they're like, oh yeah, maybe we should sell off public lands. That's what we're hearing from our folks in DC. Well, the other 90% of Americans, which include a lot of conservatives, speaking up in their districts and in their states was what killed it, because they actually heard from their voters. We need voters to stand up and tell politicians that conservation is important to them. And again, it can't just be one side.
No, you're absolutely right. And I guess the question is, how do you amplify that public opinion on a consistent basis? I recently talked to the president and CEO of the National Parks Conservation Association, and I mentioned to her, I said, it seemed that earlier in the spring, late spring, there were more protests, if you want to call it that, of people coming out to national parks and saying, we don't want you to cut the staff, we don't want you to cut funding. But that seems to have died down a little bit. So how do you consistently amplify those viewpoints to get Congress's attention?
I think social media is critical. That's where you can do it the easiest. You can bring 20 people to a protest in a national park, but a politician might not ever see that. Amplification on social media, tagging them, that's really helpful. Op-eds and media hits, like in local newspapers and news outlets, that's something they pay attention to. But I think the validator, like who the person is, who the validator is, matters. You had Joe Rogan and Cameron Haynes and Steve Rinella, famous hunters, speaking out against the public land sale. Those are conservative validators, just like Billie Eilish or, Stephen Colbert, or somebody on the left speaking out would be a validator for the left. We need validators on both sides to be speaking out who are prominent. And we also need validators who are not prominent, everyday voters who are not as famous, but are seen as a trusted voice on their side, to speak out. Because if I'm a Republican and I only hear at a protest or on social media or whatever the medium of pushback might be, that it's just a liberal person pushing back, that's not as compelling as, oh, there's a liberal person, but there's also a conservative person, one of my own voters, and I should probably, they could hold me accountable on this. Speaking to your own side to promote environmental progress is really helpful, because it shows that there's a constituency in a way that maybe they don't realize there is. And I think that the public land sell-off showed that, but it was largely, again, through social media. I mean, there are millions of people active, which is way easier to do than millions of people in the streets. And you were able to have these prominent conservative influencers and prominent liberal influencers who spoke to their own echo chambers and helped bridge the divide, because they have their own audiences that were now active in the conversation. And I think we need to replicate that play for future campaigns. That's what Nature's Nonpartisan is designed to do, is to use that social media and cultural validator, solution to these problems, because it truly is the solution. That's how you use grassroots in 2025.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Your 2025 action plan calls for restoring forests and preventing wildfires, enhancing water quality and improving Western water infrastructure, ensuring natural disaster resilience. Those are three of the four. The fourth one is bolstering stewardship of our land. The first three, climate change kind of makes that tricky, no?
Yeah, I mean, look, I believe in climate change. Obviously, if you look up my background, I've been a pretty prominent climate advocate, and I believe that's making it tricky. But I also think there's a lot we can work on across party lines to manage our forests better, to reforest our forests, to take care of water in a more efficient way. Of course, climate change is an elephant in the room, but there are other elephants in the room too. I mean, we are wasting precious water unnecessarily in the West. We are poisoning our water from runoff. We've planted trees too close together in some areas and have dead brush in other areas that we could clear out. We have not reforested in the proper way. Like there are things we can do that are not necessarily related to climate change. I mean, 95% of wildfires start from humans doing something stupid, like a firework or a gender reveal party gone wrong. There's a lot we can do that isn't just climate change related. And I think what I fear has happened is that we've made it so much about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and so much about climate change that people have lost the connection to the physical environment. They've lost their connection to why conservation is so important. And yes, climate change is contributing, but it's not the sole reason why these problems are happening. We have a duty to be hands-on in other ways than just reducing emissions. And let's build consensus there. Let's figure out where the consensus is there, instead of worrying about how China and India and the US and others are spewing out carbon emissions as the only boogeyman. I mean, that it's not the only boogeyman. And sure, climate change is making these problems worse. Absolutely. But there are other things we can do that have a lot more political support, and I think would actually make a lot more of a positive impact, especially in the short term, to preventing some of these massive problems from being as bad as they've been.
I like to say that I'm from the last century. It's a cool phrase to turn these days, but I am from the last century, and I grew up before the internet was created. I used to watch 3 channels, ABC, CBS, and NBC on TV, and we had stuff like Lassie and shows about park rangers and whatnot. And you zoom forward to the 21st century, and we don't see those shows on TV. We see kids playing battle games and different things that are totally unconnected with nature and with the outdoors. Richard Louv, I'm sure you're well familiar with, the author of Last Child in the Woods, attributes much of today's lack of connection with nature with those kinds of things, with the cell phones and the computer games and whatnot, and it's gotten worse. Is that part of the bigger problem, do you think, that creates this? I don't know if it creates a partisanship, but it possibly creates a lack of interest and lack of concern for nature.
I completely agree with that assessment because young people are struggling to find purpose and meaning and connection, and it's largely due to their phones. They're addicted to them. And even if you see national parks on Instagram or you see national parks on TikTok or whatever, it's not the same as experiencing it. And then you go into national parks and you just see people on their phones the whole time. You see people taking videos the whole time, and they're blasting music. I mean, it's just like it's not about nature anymore. It's about the social content and about the party and about the thing that you could be doing at home, but you're doing it out in nature instead. And I think that that's a huge problem. I mean, I love that national park visitation is higher, but at the same time, I go there and a lot of people who are there aren't actually enjoying it. They're just spending time on their phones and they're not connecting with nature. I think our parents need to do a better job of helping kids not just be dependent on their phones for happiness, because it's a pathway to sadness. That's what phones are, is a pathway to addiction to phones is a pathway to sadness. And the next generation is really struggling with that. I actually think every generation is sort of struggling with that, to be honest. And you get these dopamine hits that nature can't provide at that same level, but man, nature makes you feel way more grounded and provides you with natural dopamine that goes a lot farther for the happiness of your livelihood. So I think we have an opportunity to instill in the next generation a change. It's not too late, but there is a group of people, I think especially the last 10 years, where it's been increasingly more prevalent, where people are so disconnected from everything around them, not just nature, from each other, from our communities, from reality, right? It's everything on our screens is a distorted reality, whether that's a game you're playing or social media as it pertains to politics. Everything is a distorted reality. And instead of thinking, oh, maybe nature is this peaceful grounding place, it's like, oh, this is the place that goes viral on TikTok and Instagram. Oh, politics is the place where you debate ideas and concepts and policies. It's no, this is a place where we hate each other and want to kill each other. Um, and that's just really harmful for society. And we've got to fix that if we're going to have the next generation be advocates and leaders in the way that they need to be. And as someone who is an older Gen Zer, I see it becoming a bigger and bigger problem as years go on. But I also see the older generation being just as addicted a lot of times as the younger ones. And I think at some point as a society, we're going to have to grapple with the fact that our addiction to technology is ruining many things for us, including our environment.
I couldn't disagree. I was really concerned when maybe a decade ago we started seeing these pocket rangers coming out. You'd have an app on your phone that was GPS tied in, and so when you passed a certain point in a national park, instead of having a living, breathing, interpretive ranger answer your questions, you got this pre-recorded message of, you're looking at Old Faithful. Guys are, my oldest son, I took him on a river trip down the Green River through Gates of Lodore and Dinosaur National Monument, and it was about a 4 or 5 day trip. He loved it so much because he was disconnected. There were no texts, no email, no cell phone coverage, and it just allowed him to relax and enjoy nature. And how do we achieve that with a larger portion of America? It's so hard to get people out to the parks, either because of where they live or because of the expense related to it. I know there have been conversations in the past in the Biden administration, and I think in the Obama administration as well, as let's kind of revive the CCC or focus on a youth conservation corps. Are those some of the things we should be looking more seriously at to reconnect people with nature because of all the benefits that they derive from nature?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think absolutely we should be pursuing a second conservation corps in the 21st century like we did in the 20th century. We should also be instilling conservation education in schools. I think the push for climate education was helpful in some ways, but it also was more about like the science and more about the again, carbon emissions in the atmosphere, the non-tangible. I took climate change classes in high school and in college, but it doesn't instill your connection with the environment. And I think that that's a huge problem. So I think having nature and conservation education in middle school and high school, and even elementary school, where you can force kids to get outside during school and they don't have their phones. They're not allowed to have their phones. They just can be with each other. And I think back to my childhood, obviously my family instilled my love of the environment at a young age, but even if they didn't, my school brought us to state parks, and we didn't have phones, and everyone was looking at bugs and trees and birds and animals, and we were planting things, and it just was a experience that you can't trade, and I feel like we've kind of lost that in our education system. So I think it's education. I think it's also parents doing a better job of making sure that their kids aren't just on their phones all the time, that they force time with their kids outside. It sounds like a top down approach, but it's like it is for the best if people can get outside and have time outdoors and breathe fresh air and just connect with the world around them. And I think at this point, we got to force it, whether that's through schools getting their kids outside or parents getting their kids outside. But of course, I also think that we should have more programs for the next generation to be involved with, like the Civilian Conservation Corps, where they can spend a few years instead of doing a gap year in Europe. What if you did a gap year helping conserve a local environmental problem and trying to help your local environment? And you could even have some housing at national parks for next generation leaders who are trying to restore ecosystems and make that part of their gap year or whatever they want to do. But I think we have to create those options for kids, and we have to also put that in our education system.
So at the end of the day, how do you measure success? Is that something you can't gauge for another 5 years, another 10 years?
Well, there's a couple ways. I mean, I guess I don't know exactly what success looks like in 5 or 10 years, but I do think that we need, in 5 or 10 years, we can say, if you could ask the average person on the street, is the environment seen as a liberal or conservative issue? They say no, it's just seen as an American issue, as a shared issue. That right now would not be the answer, and I think that answer would resemble a lot of progress on a lot of core issues. That would probably mean that we made progress in terms of funding our public lands. That probably means we would have made progress in terms of reforesting and rewilding America, improving our and improving our water quality, et cetera. If we haven't reached those sorts of big solutions across party lines, of course, the American public is going to continue to see this as a polarizing topic. So I think that that's how you track it, is the culture, which is downstream politics these days, is the culture something that has shifted in America to being a shared value again? Because that probably means we've made a lot of progress. And are our wildfire seasons better? Is our water quality and the pollution in it better? I think we do have to worry about metrics. Like what direction are we heading in when it comes to these environmental challenges? That's all trackable. Our wildfire seasons are getting bigger and worse, and we can track that, right? And that's true for almost every environmental issue. Are we heading in the right direction? We're not going to solve it all in the next 5 or 10 years, but are we heading in the right direction? And again, if it's just as polarizing or more polarizing than it is today, we won't be making that progress.
That's Benji Backer. He's the driving force behind Nature is Nonpartisan. It's a campaign to get more Americans involved in protecting nature, enjoying nature. You can learn more at their website, natureisnonpartisan.org. Benji, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate your insights and wish you the best of luck in your campaign.
An absolute pleasure. Thanks for doing the work that you do. National parks are the great uniter in this country, and we should build on that. And so I'm happy to come back on anytime and also team up on whatever we can to make nature nonpartisan, make our national parks nonpartisan, and get the solutions that we need. So thanks for having me.
That's our show for this week. I hope you found it both interesting and informative. Next week, Lynn Riddick travels, virtually, to Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve in Alaska to learn how the National Park Service works throughout the year to protect whales and other marine life from collisions with cruise ships and other watercraft. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.